The following program was paid for by the friends and partners of WLMB-TV 40 Toledo.
In 2013, civil war broke out in South Sudan, and there were atrocities that were being reportedly committed against the people. They felt like they needed to flee for their lives. Many of them crossed the border into northern Uganda. The government there in Uganda set up refugee camps. One of our partners came to us and said we would like to put in an FM radio station in order to reach into these refugee camps. And so Sunset Solutions did the engineering work that we normally do, and eventually Radio Usalama FM was put on the air to reach into these refugee camps.
Well, I want to welcome you to another episode of Main Street, the fastest half hour in television. I'm Dr. Jamey Schmitz. Of course, I'm joined by my co-host of 21 years, Virginia Bossa.
Well, Jamey, it is great to be here, and we have a fascinating show today. We're going to be talking about technology in missions, solutions for reaching our world. And our guest today is Tim Yazel. He's the Ministry Partnerships Representative with Sunset Solutions. And so, Tim, welcome. We're so glad that you're joining us here today.
Good to be here, Jamey and Virginia. Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah, right. Tim, it's great to have you here. You know, you and I have been friends for a while now.
Yes.
But tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and also a little bit about Sunset Solutions.
Okay, well, as you mentioned, my name is Tim Yazel, and I am a native of Ohio. I grew up in Lima, started working in radio in Lima when I was a teenager, and went on from there to work in radio in some way or another most of my adult life. And but when I was a senior in high school, God very clearly called me into the pastorate, and so I gave up radio. I said, God, it's yours. I'm giving it back to you. I'm done with radio. You've called me to preach, and I will do that. So I have pastored for 43 years, and God has very clearly made that known that that's what He wanted me to do, and used me in that capacity. I've always wondered why I had a passion for radio and also a passion for being a pastor. Never quite could figure out why God led me one direction, and then it seemed like we just made a hard right, and I was off on a new adventure. And now with Sunset Solutions, I'm getting to combine my years and my heart for pastoral ministry with my experience, my background, the abilities God's given me in radio, my passion for Christian radio and television as well. And so now I'm finding out in Sunset Solutions the journey that God's had me on.
Well, that is awesome how, God has brought that back around for you in technology. So what services does Sunset Solutions offer? Well,
Sunset Solutions is a ministry that provides technology-based solutions to advance the gospel worldwide. What we do is we partner with ministries around the world, and those ministries have a need, they have an issue. It may be that they've decided that they could better reach the people they're trying to reach through radio, and they come to us and they say, we would like to start an FM radio station or a shortwave radio station. And so we have engineers on our staff that will do all of the technical work that needs to be done. They'll do all of the legal work that needs to be done in order to get that station on the air. We get the equipment, we go and install the equipment, we train people to maintain the equipment, we train the people that are on the air, and then we turn that over to our partner who then operates the radio station. Radio is just one of our technologies that we use, but that's where we really got started.
All right, now, we had talked previously, and I think that it's very interesting, how you got involved with Sunset Solutions, because, you said that you were into radio, and then you went into pastoring. So how did it happen that you got back into radio?
Well,
technology?
Kind of a unique story as well. When I was a senior in high school, my life was very carefully mapped out. I knew exactly where I was going. There was a missionary radio station called HCJB, and I felt like God had called me to be an engineer there. I'd never talked to them yet, but so I was enrolled at Vanderbilt University to study electrical engineering. wanted to become an engineer so that I could then go on to the mission field and be connected with HCJB.
And that's located in
Quito, Ecuador.
Yes.
In Quito, Ecuador. Probably one of the best known, what I would call missionary radio stations. It's a local Christian radio station in Quito, in the world, and that's where I wanted to go. But along about March of my senior year of high school, God began to deal with me about becoming a pastor. It didn't make sense to me because God had very clearly called me into missions, and I couldn't understand this. And I wrestled with God. I could tell you stories about that, and at first said, no, God, I can't do this. But finally I said, okay, God, I know that you're calling me to be a pastor, and so I yielded to the Lord to become a pastor. A couple of years later, God, in a very clear way, gave radio back to me. I didn't give up being a pastor. I was still a pastor, but he gave radio back to me in some very interesting ways. And so down through the years, I've been connected with radio and television, and both on air and in the engineering fields with radio. In 2015, my wife and I were invited by our daughter to visit Sunset Solutions. Our daughter was on the staff there as Director of PR Communications, and she invited us to come to what they called a global outreach celebration. And so my wife and I went, and we toured Sunset Solutions. We heard the presentations, and I heard a young man give a presentation about the well monitors that we have, and I can talk about those a little bit more later. And his presentation so gripped me. I went because it was a radio ministry, but I was gripped by the well monitoring ministry. And my wife and I talked it over, and we said, this is a no-brainer for us. It's very obvious this is where the Lord wanted us. So we prayed about it, and finally we applied to become missionaries there and started on that journey with Sunset Solutions.
Very good. How did Sunset Solutions themselves as a ministry, how did they get started?
Well, I mentioned HCJB Radio. Back in the mid to late 70s, HCJB Radio began an outreach into the Soviet Union. Back then, the Soviet Union was closed. It was behind the Iron Curtain. We couldn't get missionaries into the Soviet Union, at least not very easily. And so HCJB began to broadcast the gospel into the Soviet Union. Of course, very quickly, the Soviet Union began to jam that signal. They didn't just pick on HCJB. They banned and jammed all political broadcasts, and they considered Christian broadcasting to be of that nature. We're talking about freedom in Christ, and they didn't want that to be heard, so they began to jam the signal. So HCJB upped the power, Soviet Union upped the jamming power, and so they jammed it. So they began a project. HCJB assembled a team of engineers in Elkhart, Indiana, in donated space, and these engineers began to design and to build a 500,000 watt shortwave transmitter. And eventually it was shipped to Quito. It was installed, put on the air. Everything was set up so that it would reach into the Soviet Union. They began to broadcast.
And so what year was this? Because this was during the Cold War?
During the Cold War, when all this began. I think it was about 86, I believe, when they assembled the team of engineers, and about 89 when the station went on the air. And the Soviet Union just thought it wasn't worth it to try to jam it. And so the gospel was being preached on a daily, on an hourly basis into the Soviet Union when we couldn't get the gospel in any other way. And it was very cutting edge at that time, I would say.
Very good. Tell us a little bit more about, HCBJ. That was a radio plant, at one point. But there's other radio plants that Sunset Solution partners with. Tell us about that whole arm of that ministry. How worldwide is that?
Well, to date, we have planted over 500 radio stations around the world.
That's amazing.
The best way that I can share with you about our radio planting ministry is to tell you a story. In 2013, civil war broke out in South Sudan, and there were atrocities that were being reportedly committed against the people. They felt like they needed to flee for their lives, and so they began to leave South Sudan. Many of them crossed the border into Uganda, into northern Uganda. The government there in Uganda set up refugee camps, and they are all over that area of northern Uganda. The Ajamani refugee camps, I think, are among the largest. And I read recently that at one time, the largest of the refugee camps in the Ajamani region was 250,000 people. Now, this looks to me, from the pictures, to be like barren land where grass huts just all of a sudden started popping up all over the place. And over 1 million people have crossed over the Uganda over the South Sudan border into Uganda, northern Uganda. Over 1 million people. And many of these people, probably most of these people, are unreached. One of our partners came to us and said we would like to put in an FM radio station in order to reach into these refugee camps. And so Sunset Solutions did the engineering work that we normally do, and eventually Radio Usalama FM was put on the air to reach into these refugee camps. And what a great time that was. What a great day it was to be able to have the gospel being preached into the refugee camps. However, a lot of these people, when they were forced to leave South Sudan, they left with just the clothes on their back, maybe a handful of possessions, a bag of clothes or something like that. And of course, there's no electricity in most of these refugee camps, or maybe any of these refugee camps. And so how do they listen to this FM station that's being put on the air? Well, Sunset Solutions developed and had already developed a little portable radio. And this radio is solar powered. There's a solar cell on the back, and they can actually open this up like a clamshell, and they can sit it in their windowsill, and this charges all day long, and then in the evening they get between 8 and 10 hours of battery time in order to listen to the radio. And so people will gather around the radio. I've heard stories that 6 or 8 families will gather in one hut and listen to the radio until the batteries die. This has 9 memory channels, but we pre-program these radios before they leave Sunset Solutions, so they only pick up stations that broadcast the gospel.
Amen.
So they can go through all 9 channels, and they're going to get the gospel on every one of those 9 channels. So people, these refugees will gather in a hut, turn on the radio for something to do, and they'll listen to the gospel being preached for 8 hours a night. Because there's not a lot else that they can do. And they're hearing the gospel. And our partner's receiving letters on a regular basis of people's lives that have been changed as the result of listening.
What kind of impact have you seen through these radios?
Well, there have been people that have come to faith in Jesus Christ. And I heard one story, and if I understood it correctly, one of the men that's now a key worker at Radio Usalama FM was not a believer in Christ when he started listening to the station. And through listening to Radio Usalama FM, he's become a believer in Christ and now works at the radio station. And we've heard many, many other stories of that nature. So we are trying to distribute as many of these as we can into these refugee camps.
And what do one of those cost?
These radios are $40, basically $40 delivered to, for instance, Uganda. I like to call them our $40 missionary, because these radios oftentimes go where missionaries can't go. And they are in huts where we don't have enough missionaries to be in all the huts that these radios are in, where the gospel is being preached. And so we partner with our partner ministry in order to get these distributed to as many of the refugees as possible.
All right. Well, we want to hear more about those and more about the well monitoring that you were talking about earlier. But we're going to go to a quick break, and we'll be right back.
The well goes in, and people might be walking 5 miles to get water, filling up a 5-gallon bucket, and then carrying that bucket 5 miles back home. And they'll say, why should we walk 5 miles? We live in a grass hut. They abandon their grass hut. They build a new grass hut right near the well, and a village springs up.
WLMB's free monthly program guide keeps you informed about your favorite Christ-centered and family-friendly programming found on WLMB. There's something for the whole family to enjoy, from great Bible teachers to classic family favorites. Plus, you'll find family movies, news from a Christian perspective, local shows Main Street and Pastor's Point, excellent don't-miss documentaries, and much more. Enjoy quality Christian television on WLMB-TV 40 and sign up for your free monthly program guide today.
The mission of Dominion Broadcasting WLMB-TV 40 is to provide Christ-centered television of high technical quality and programming excellence to uplift, unite, educate, challenge, and encourage viewers in a manner consistent with the teachings of God's Word. Won't you join us? Please send your gift today and be a part of the ongoing mission of WLMB-TV 40. Thank you. Now, back to Main Street.
Well, we're talking about technology and missions. We're talking with Tim Yazel from Sunset Solutions. And Tim, we were talking about radio, but also Sunset Solutions does well monitoring. Will you share a little bit about this?
Sure. I mentioned that when I went to the celebration that it was the presentation about the well monitors that really caught my attention. That had to be of the Lord because, I'm a radio guy. And so I was kind of amazed. But this young man shared how the groups will put in clean water wells. That seems to be kind of a hot button in missions today, giving communities clean water. I'm working with a group, or have worked with a group, that is going into an area that's way out in the bush. And these people had been using an old dirty mud hole to get their water. And I've seen pictures of this mud hole. They just have brush and sticks around the mud hole to keep the animals out so they don't get animal feces in their water hole. The picture shows a man getting down into the water hole and scooping up water and putting it in a trough for the animals, and the water is just as muddy as can be. And this is the water that they feed their babies with, and many times their babies don't even get past 6 months old because of the dirty water. And so one of the groups that I've been working with and been in contact with has been going over into Africa, and in order to win the people's trust and to win them over, they have been drilling wells for the people, giving them clean water in their village for the very first time. And when the people see the water coming out of the pump, it's crystal clear. I don't know if they've ever even seen crystal clear water other than maybe when it's coming down as rain. But it's like 4th of July here or New Year's Eve or something of that nature. They get so excited about seeing this clean water and then knowing that they'll have clean water to drink and clean water to feed their children. But in Africa especially, one thing that people don't know is their youth group might go over and put in a well or be a part of putting in a well, or they might send a team over. But in Africa, at any point in time, as many as 45% of the wells are not producing, or they are underproducing, and many times nobody even knows about it.
So a ministry effort goes in, puts in a well, it looks great when they leave, and then it doesn't look so great a few months later.
Right.
And that was a real problem,
Yes.
So Sunset Solutions came in with their technology and said, we can fix this.
Yes.
And how do they fix it?
Well, what happens is people will go to that clean water well and find out it doesn't work. They'll go home. They'll come back the second day, and if it's still not working, they go right back to the old mud hole. And then, because some of them are so remote, nobody ever hears that their well's not working. I saw a video with one man that is part of a ministry that puts in the wells, and people came to him and said, we have no water, we have no water. And he said, what about the well we put in? They said, oh, that hasn't worked for 2 months. And he said, nobody told me. If I had been told, I would have been able to go fix it. And so we have installed a well monitor there. These well monitors include sensors that monitor, for instance, how many times you have to pump the well before you get water, how much water comes with each pump, how many pumps a day, how many strokes a day there are, how much water goes through it in a day. Monitors whatever basically they want to monitor. It beams that up to a satellite by way of a satellite modem. It comes back down into Elkhart at Sunset Solutions. We gather the data, and then we can call one of our partners and say, hey, well number 32 is not functioning. And they're able to send a maintenance person out to that well. Sometimes the maintenance guy has to go through terrorist-controlled areas to get to the well, and so they don't just routinely go out and check on the well once a week or once a month. So the well could be down for a long time and nobody knows about it. With the well monitors, we can notify our partner the same day. Same day the well fails, they can know about it, and possibly have a repairman there within a day or two to fix the well.
Wow.
That's amazing how technology, how quickly, that it's come so far. So what kind of impact are these wells having on the communities?
Well, here's what happens. When a well goes in, there seems to be a progression of events. And it's a unique situation, I guess you'd call it. The well goes in, and people might be walking 5 miles to get water, filling up a 5-gallon bucket, and then carrying that bucket 5 miles back home. And they'll say, why should we walk 5 miles? We live in a grass hut. They abandon their grass hut. They build a new grass hut right near the well, and a village springs up. And then when a village springs up, there's an opportunity to plant a church, and that is one of our ultimate goals, is that churches would get planted, people would hear the gospel, and our mission is to see mature disciples of Jesus Christ made, and that is our hope and our goal. And so that is exciting that the wells can end up leading to the planting of a church. Sometimes our engineers wonder, okay, I'm soldering together a circuit board for a well monitor. What am I doing for the gospel? Not realizing that what you're doing could very well lead to a church being planted,
Absolutely.
a pastor being placed there, and people coming to faith in Christ.
So between the radios and between the well monitors, how do you determine who receives assistance for either of these ministries?
We get contacted by partners. Sometimes we get contacted by people that aren't yet partners but become our partner, and they go through a process of screening. We talk to them and we see if this is something that's feasible for them. They might get assigned a project manager, and should we decide to move forward and they decide to move forward, they officially become one of our partners, and then we work with our partners. So we get contacted, that initiates the relationship, and then we hope to have a good long-term relationship with each of our partners.
All right, so you guys do the wells and radios. So what do you see coming up for Sunset Solutions? What else do you guys offer?
I talked to a man about a week ago, and he is part of a large radio network here in the United States. But they recently went international, and they planted an FM radio station in Africa. And he said that one of the things we want to do is we want to move our studios. And we just need to move our studios in order to save some money. He said, do you do anything like that? I said, that's what we're all about, that type of thing. We have engineers here on staff to do that very thing. So I'm hopeful that they will become one of our partners, that we'll get to go over to Africa, we'll be able to relocate their studio for them. And then he said, and we do quite well in the cities. Our signal covers the cities quite well, but we cover more area outside the city than we cover in the city. And he said the people in the city have radios and they have electricity that they can run their radios from, but the people out in the bush or out in the country have no way of listening to our radio station that we've planted, and we would like to someday begin to distribute Sunset radios to the people in the outlying areas. So again, we're hopeful that we can become partners and that we can begin to see them distribute the Sunset radios to the people in the outlying areas so they also can hear the gospel.
Tim, what are some of the most complex problems that the ministry faces?
A project that I'm excited about is what we call our Solar Media Center. That's still in development, but it started out looking like a street light, a lamp post, and at the top it has a solar panel and a street light, and let's say they install one near the well, and so the well has light in the evening, and they can gather there, get their water, but it becomes a gathering point for people, and the light allows them to have a gathering place. But at the base it has our Solar Media Center there, and the Solar Media Center can be configured any number of ways. It might have an FM radio in it, it might have a shortwave receiver, it might have an MP3 player in there. And while they're at the well getting their water, or at the well just visiting with their neighbors, they're hearing the gospel in their own language coming out of this Solar Media Center. Or perhaps they're hearing the Bible in their own language.
So this is like the social hub, and this is church.
Very much so. And then that's when a church can be planted out of that. At the base of the Solar Media Center, there might be cables coming out of the base like an octopus or something, and those are cell phone chargers. And you might say, well, why would people in the bush have cell phones? But I've been there, and they do. They nearly all do, because that's their only connection to the rest of civilization. And so they plug in their cell phone to charge it. But we are able to have a message pop up on their cell phone and say, would you like to have the Bible in your own language? And they say yes. And the Bible, the audio Bible, is pushed to their cell phone by that cable that they've plugged in. It's not only a charging cable, it's now a sync cable to give them that file. It asks, would you like to have gospel messages, or would you like to have teaching about Jesus Christ in your own language? And they say yes, and that's pushed to their phone. Then they can go back to their hut, and with their phone they can listen to those gospel messages or listen to the Bible in their own language. A lot of these people can't read, so to give them a Bible in print is not effective, but to let them hear the Bible in their language, they get the gospel into their lives that way.
Yeah. Well, Tim, with you being the official representative for Sunset Solutions,
one of the officials.
Yes, one of the official. Let me ask you this. You know, Virginia and I believe this is a very important ministry, and I think as our viewers have been, hearing about this unique ministry of using technology to reach so many people with the gospel, how can our viewers help you, and how can local churches in this area that WLMB serves, how can they help you and Sunset Solutions?
Well, as far as the local churches are concerned, one of the things that I'll be doing, one of my ministries, would be to go to churches. My wife and I travel all the time. We're out on the road this week traveling, and we are willing to come to any church to talk about Sunset Solutions. If the pastor is on vacation and you need pulpit supply, I can come and I can share the message that morning and weave in a presentation of Sunset Solutions at the same time. My wife Becky can be out in the lobby at our table, and we have literature that can tell them more about Sunset Solutions. But also, I would encourage people to go to our website, which is sunsetsolutions.org. That's S-O-N. sunsetsolutions.org, and you can read all about Sunset Solutions. It tells about our various ministries. It has testimonials from people whose lives have been changed. There's a way to give by going to our website. If somebody would like to, let's say they want to be able to send some radios overseas, they can give and designate their gift for Sunset Radios. We're encouraging Vacation Bible Schools to adopt Sunset Radios as their missions project, or churches to use their Christmas offering for sending some Sunset Radios to the Ajamani refugee camps or into Burkina Faso, where we're reaching many people that have never been reached with the gospel, or all around the world, Papua New Guinea and Peru. There are Christian radio stations all over the world where we can send these little $40 missionaries, and people can hear the gospel for the very first time.
That is a good word. Well, Tim, thank you for being with us,
yes,
and I'm sure our viewers will be responding.
That's right.
Thank you.
All right. If you'd like to learn more about Sunset Solutions, check out their website. But thank you for watching this week's episode of Main Street. Be sure to join us next week for another great episode.
We hope that Main Street has been a blessing to you today. Please feel free to contact the following to learn more about the topics discussed on today's show. WLMB would like to thank all the faithful supporters of WLMB that make this program possible.